is, as Assemblywoman Miller referenced, it's on building a multiracial and multi-ethnic network and ecosystem for women of color. Working collectively will be how more women, especially women of color, are more representative in political leadership positions. During this session, panelists will share how they have built multiracial, multi-ethnic collaborations and coalitions to support the political pipeline of women of color, as well as advocacy and public policy. So please, panelists, please come up to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Goodness, that video just did my whole intro, so I'm thankful that we played it. I'm Kimberly Sawyer. I'm the Texas Program Director for ReflectUS. And so just all the great things that we have going on at ReflectUS, I'm working on the Texas programming to increase and accelerate women's representation. So we're gonna just jump right in, and I'm gonna introduce our panelists for today. Let's see here, we have Madalene Mielke, who is a nationally recognized civil rights leader and member of USA's Today's inaugural Leaders of Change. As president and CEO of APAICS and founder and principal of Arkham Group, LLC, she brings nearly 25 years of experience in political campaigns, specializing in political and nonprofit fundraising and political training. She has spent her entire professional political career working to bring diversity and political process and nurturing candidates and staff as they move forward in bringing political change. So, welcome, Madalene. We also have the Honorable Selena Torres, who is the Nevada Assemblywoman, and we heard her great story yesterday morning, but just briefly, Selena Torres is an educator and was born and raised in Nevada. Her parents eventually made Assembly District 3 their home because of the diversity that reflected their own family. And as a legislator, she draws on her lived experience as a public school teacher to create a more equitable Nevada for all. So, welcome. And last but not least, we have, the Honorable April Fournier, who is an at-large city council member of Portland, Maine. And she's also the National Program Manager for Advanced Native Political Leadership. April Fournier is the National Program Director for Advanced National Political Leadership. She supports and develops the delivery of Native Leadership Institute leadership training and Native Digital Fellowship. Also, super cool, she is the co-founder of the first all-indigenous roller derby team, and work to leverage technology and community building to engage the team members globally. She is currently serving as an at-large counselor on the City Council for Portland, Maine, and she's the first Native woman to serve in that office. So please just welcome our panelists. And we're just gonna jump right into the questions. And I guess I'll just start with you, Madalene. Why, and I mean, you've kind of touched on this all weekend, but why is it important to have a multiracial, multi-ethnic networks of ecosystems for women of color? And if you can just share a story from your experience that highlights the importance of the network and collaboration.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and I wasn't supposed to actually be on this panel. So, surprise, hello. That's what you do when you're, the ED, you just kind of step in when that happens. Unfortunately, I wanted to highlight a New Mexico state legislator. She was recently appointed into the state legislature. She is of Lao descent, and she unfortunately was exposed to COVID and so couldn't travel. And I really wanted to highlight that just because of the fact that we do want to make sure that we have underrepresented communities who are starting to really step into their political power in the elected roles. They've always been there in terms of organizing and being sure to advocate for their communities, and now that they're in elected leadership positions, being able to see them as elected leaders. And that also means working towards making sure that their representation, along with other women of color, and also that includes diverse political spectrum, because one of our coalition members is a organization that is a right-leaning organization. So conservative women who are interested in also running for office. So being sure that there's this coalition that understands as much as we can to be supportive and empathetic of the challenges that we face. We see that the challenges are pretty broad as well as very specific to our individual constituencies, and at the same time being able to understand that we're all going through this together, whether it's sexism, racism, the understanding that we are not seen as worthy of male candidates and being held to a different standard. And so as women of color building this coalition, it's meant to support, uplift, as well as to encourage each other to continue through this process, even though we know it can be challenging. And so, when we do collaborations, for instance, with Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Jackson Brown, I think that's such a wonderful way to introduce her now. We did a op-ed with Higher Heights because we talked about how it's so important for our communities to be seen as working together, because we are working together. So it's not just statements and public actions. It's also this continuing recognition of opportunities for us to say, let's step in and make sure that people know that we support each other, and this is how we do that. So we do all these things to recognize that we are in challenging times and that we are here to support each other through those issues and to help each other when others want to divide us. And that in itself is something that calls for us to have action. And so part of that work through the ReflectUS Coalition is to make sure that people understand that as women, we might have different challenges because of our constituencies and lived experiences. That doesn't mean that we can't support one another when we go through it. So these are the types of stories we want to highlight and share, and then we also hope to role model that for other women to see that we can all continue to work together.
Thank you. And I just want to touch on the part where you talked about cross-partisanship and jump over to April, because I know you're on the local council, and I'm thinking that's nonpartisan possibly.
It's supposed to be.
And so if you could maybe just share your stories from that, like how
Sure.
it's just important to be able to work in that cross-partisan manner.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be on the land of the Washoe, Paiute, and Shoshone. It is just beautiful. My people are lower, so they're down in Arizona, but being in the desert has just been amazing. So I live in Portland, Maine. Maine is still, I believe, the whitest state in the U.S. Might have. Oh, great. We're not it anymore. We're second. But in running for local office on the municipal level, it really is supposed to be nonpartisan. It's really supposed to be focused on community issues. But what we do find is, especially if you're the first or the only, not everyone is as excited to see you in those positions of power, because it does challenge what has been the norm or who has held the power for so long. And so I think what we have found, especially with working, I'll say across the aisle, but really it's just, there's all different spectrums of political ideology. I think really focusing on our values and where we intersect and where we agree allows us to, put some of the other disagreements aside and not just see everything as red and blue, but really truly say, what are we looking at? We're looking at the school budget. We want to make sure that we get this passed so children get, universal free lunch, or they're able to get, their curriculum delivered, or our teachers get paid. Can we all agree on that? Great. So let's let's all move that. So I think it has become so just very hot button and controversial and adversarial, and it doesn't necessarily always need to be. Of course, there are, I think fundamental rights that we hold on to as part of our value system, that there are some non-negotiables, but where do we find those places where we can agree when we're really trying to put the label aside and just saying where are we going to move things forward?
For sure. Thank you. And so, Selena, I just wanted to ask you about your time as the chair of the Hispanic caucus in the legislature, and how does that kind of help with your working in these networks of, multi-ethnic collaboration, especially just with your background and everything?
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody. It's so great to be here again. And here in the state of Nevada, we're very diverse. So we have a very large Latino population here in the state, and unfortunately, we continue to be underrepresented. 30% of the state of Nevada is Latino, but only 15% of our representatives are Latino, and we're going to have even less next legislative session. It's a shame. We are fortunate that we have strong partners with a lot of our community organizations, and I think the Hispanic Caucus has taken the bulk of the work too in propelling issues that impact immigrants. That being said, we recognize that immigration is not a Latino issue. This is an issue that impacts diverse communities. And that being said, I think it's been critical that we create partnerships with different organizations that are not just Latino. So the Hispanic Caucus, yes, of course, we partner with Latino organizations in our state, but we've done a lot of work partnering with ACDC, One APIA, some of the Ethiopian Refugee Center, the different groups that advocate for refugees and immigrants here in the state of Nevada, recognizing that the immigrant experience is not a monolithic experience, and it's not just a Latino experience. Unfortunately, I think that's how it is often the message of what it means to be an immigrant is that that there's one story and that you come from one place. Even as Latinos, there's this idea that all Latinos are Mexicans, regardless of the fact that we know that's not true. Right? Our community and the immigrant community comes from diverse places. So we recognize how essential it is that we build these coalitions. And I think our colleagues have stepped up. I think everybody, all my honorary co-chairs have signed on to legislation that's going to help propel change for immigrants in our state. And I think, while immigration remains a federal issue and we can't change, I can't create comprehensive immigration reform with any bill that I present. However, what we can do is change the quality of life for immigrants here in the state of Nevada. We can look at healthcare, we can look at housing, we can look at access to employment for immigrants, because not just DACA recipients should be able to be teachers. All immigrants should have access to becoming a teacher in our community. They should have access to getting any employment license that they want. And we've passed progressive legislation here in the state of Nevada to make sure that's possible.
Thank you. And so, Madalene, I know earlier you mentioned some of the work that APAICS did with the collaboration with Higher Heights. So of course you have to be very intentional when you're doing those type of collaborations, but what other recommendations do you have when you're trying to organize just similar collaborations?
So I like to take the examples of the elected officials who have done it themselves. So I'll say current mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, when she was running for city council, she had a shared campaign office with several of her fellow city council members who were running for re-election or they were running for the first time, and they were all women of color. So they used the same campaign office space. They used, that way they had all of their volunteers go to the same place. And those are the types of things I talk about because it's so important to see that they're doing something to build community. And they're doing something to say, we are going to support each other. And so oftentimes we will silo constituencies, and that doesn't help us in terms of helping each other grow and learn from each other as well and our shared stories. And so I think those types of examples are important. In the beginning of the current administration, Latinos Represent, who is also part of the coalition, we did a webinar to encourage our communities to apply for the admin for positions, because it's so important for people to also recognize that being a political appointee is also a public service. And so that is not an elected leadership role. It is, however, a place of influence, because you are working towards public policy. And so we wanted to see more Latinas and Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander women submit their resumes for consideration for presidential appointments. And so we do these things because we want to highlight the people who have gone through it in the past, and as well as provide a roadmap, or at least the outline of what to expect, because a lot of times our communities are unaware of the process. And what I like to say about APAICS is we're here to demystify the process and make government more accessible. And so we do that also by sharing our own experiences with other communities, so that they also can learn from us if we've been the first, and we can learn from them if they've been the first. Because the whole point is to share the information so that everyone has the ability to be a part of public service.
Thank you. And I know we mentioned it in the beginning with your bio, April, about the roller derby, and how even before we came up, I was just saying that it's not those networks that are, like this is going to be a political network. So what did it take to organize something like that, and maybe just some of the outcomes that have come out of the roller derby group?
Yeah, sure. So everything I learned about politics, I learned from roller derby. How to start a nonprofit, how to fundraise, how to do mediation when there are grievances, how to write policy, how to write contracts, because you need places to be able to have the events and make sure that the venue doesn't fall through on their contract so that you can, continue to play. But there's so many different personalities that came together within this sport that was historically a very white sport, but then evolved into really being more intersectional. But if you're bringing 40 women together in a room without any sort of structure or any ability to be able to negotiate and build relationships, it's going to be a challenge. Because we all like to talk, we have different ideas. So in creating Team Indigenous Roller Derby, it was really recognizing that often in every space that we were in across the country and even across the globe, we were often the one and only. So in Maine Roller Derby, I was the only Native skater, and it was hard not to be able to have someone to share some of the challenges, whether it's talking about land acknowledgements or talking about how we feel about how policy is written or how we talk about the land that we occupy. And so in looking at the other leagues that were all across the country, you started to hear the same stories. Like, gosh, it's really hard to be the only person here who recognizes the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, or the only person who gets so frustrated when they hear people refer to, Columbus Day instead of Indigenous Peoples Day. So then it was definitely, gosh, we need a space where we can come together and just share our stories, because the result of the way that this country was founded, we all have different paths to how we are Indigenous. So some of us had the opportunity to grow up with our tribes and be able to learn our cultures and our languages and our customs, and others don't get to live on their homeland. I live in Maine. I don't live, on my tribe's land, but it was because my mother was taken in the 60s as part of that 60s scoop and given to white parents. And so she never knew her family. She never knew her language. Now she's doing that reconnection as I'm doing that reconnection to my culture. And so bringing all of these skaters together into this collective for Team Indigenous, we got to normalize that there is a different path for everybody, but each path is just as authentic. And now we have this network that is 4 years old now that we can come back to when we need help. They helped me fundraise when I was running for office in Maine, even though they were all over the country. Some have come forward with concerns, or they just reconnected with their biological family and they just don't know how to feel about it. But having that network of people that really see you for who you authentically are was just so critical to building power in all the different spaces that we're building power. And so I think just being able to make those connections and understand that we're not alone and we all have different journeys, but every journey is just so important. I think that was the beauty of creating that team, and the fact that it's still going and we're expanding has just been amazing.
Excellent, excellent. And y'all, there is a great video on YouTube with the roller derby. I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is amazing. Best stress reliever ever. Let's see here. So, we've talked kind of about the highs, and, we all love the highs. But just like, Celina, when you're kind of putting these groups together, what has been some of like the biggest challenges that you maybe can speak on?
So one of the biggest challenges is getting all the groups to come to the table. And part of that, I think, is like just availability, right? Like the limits of a schedule and how many hours are in a day definitely becomes a challenge, especially here in Nevada. We're a part-time legislature, which means that we go to Carson City for 4 months every other year. And the rest of the time I'm doing my full-time job, which is educating our kids and teaching, which is that's a full day. I am busy from 7:30 in the morning until 3:30 p.m. every single day, if not later, because I'm working with our kids. And I really, I take my job as an educator very seriously. And so for me, that's my classroom time. That's my time that I owe to my kids. And so I think just the limits on time becomes a restraint too for the community. It's like, okay, can we do a meeting at 2 p.m.? No, I'm not available. Can we do it 1 p.m.? No, I'm not available. How about this day? No, I have something for school. I'm on a field trip, or whatever it is. So there's always that limitation. I think that the other limitation then just becomes everybody, and I'm sure in your own communities you've seen this as well. Everybody has their own personality. Right? And we see this and getting all these personalities to the table together to really focus on the issue, I think is really critical. And I think here in Nevada we're very lucky. We have some really strong mediators for that, making sure that we can kind of okay, it's fine. I'll talk to so and so. They'll come around. And then I think the other part of it becomes that the job of a legislator is different than the job of the activists, because the unfortunate reality is when I'm going to Carson City, I have to make negotiations too. And it's hard because I can bring a bill that I know would be great for our community, right? And I think specifically about a piece of legislation regarding immigration that we weren't able to get forward, but we were able to make significant amendments to the bill so that we could end up with $500,000 for the UNLV Immigration Clinic, which led to the deportation defense and defense for child refugees. And while that wasn't what the bill actually originally did, the bill had nothing to do with $500,000. And while obviously I'm proud of that accomplishment, that's not what we brought the bill for. We brought the bill for something else. The $500,000 was a negotiation, right? And on my part, I feel that it was a pretty good negotiation. We were able to ask for a bill that didn't have any fiscal note, and then instead we ended up with $500,000. I see some of our community heads. I was yes, it was a good negotiation on my part. But at the end of the day, it wasn't what we wanted. And so other people on that table were still very upset and very angry. And I think the reality is that's the role of the coalition and the activists behind us, right? They should be upset. They should be angry. I was upset. I was angry. But the reality is it was either get something or nothing, right? So I think just making sure that, we can come to the table and work together. And some of the individuals in that group were so mad that they still won't talk to me. Or that they said I hate immigrants, which is clearly not true. I wouldn't have brought a bill like that if I hated immigrants. Right? So I think reminding people to come to the table, be ready, political figures will never do everything to make everybody happy. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and sometimes there's a lot going on behind closed doors of what we can and can't do. But we all are playing a part, right? And it's important, though, that our political leaders come to that table to listen to everybody and say, let's have a conversation. Let me hear the problem. Two, if you have a problem with something that I did, let me hear your grievances. Maybe I can explain what happened. Maybe I can't. Sometimes we can't. But let me just hear it so that we can make some changes moving forward. So I think everybody coming together is really critical, even putting those personalities or whatever past issues people might have aside.
Yeah, it's like just mashing all the people together and, please. Okay, well, Madalene, I mean, I know you've been at this for a while. So what are the challenges that you've seen just along the way? I feel like you have some gems for us to share. So.
Well, challenges are always going to exist. You know, we just know that. We don't live in utopia. We wouldn't be working on this. And my goal one day is to not even have APAICS exist. Because the goal of the organization is to increase representation. And if we haven't accomplished that, whether it's, obviously in my lifetime or our next generation, you don't want these types of organizations to exist, because what you're looking for is visibility. You're looking for recognition, and you're looking for people who feel that they've been empowered to do the work of being elected leaders and being recognized as public officials and appointments and commissions. That is what, reflective democracy looks like. And so, the challenges that exist, are all indicative of, a political environment that we have no control, variables that are totally out of our control. We can all have the best relationships with all of our coalition members, and we would still not get to where we want to be. And I think along the way, you can't feel, obviously you can feel, you just can't let those feelings make you feel overwhelmed to the point that you want to give up. Because a lot of times that despair and the days when we have outcomes that are not in our favor, knowing that we must continue the work and to continue to find ways to work with one another, because we cannot do this work alone as individual constituencies, as individual ethnic groups. And as women who are more than half of this population for this country, we need to be able to make sure that we are visible. And that means making sure that every constituency and organization that works towards encouraging youth leaders to also participate and not be apathetic and not look at our system and say, we all know it wasn't built for us because a whole bunch of white men built it in the first place. And so they never thought of us when we were a part of it. That's why we didn't have women's rights, voting rights, until much later, and even then, women of color. So all of that history really weighs on people at times. And like when you have negative outcomes for that one day, yes, feel that, dwell in it and hopefully make that part of the motivation to say the next generation shouldn't feel this. Because I think back to, looking in my history of reading and listening to my elders, like in the 60s, of how all the trauma they suffered through to get us to this point where we can celebrate the diversity we currently have. And so I feel that, the challenges that we have, hope that motivates us to say this should not exist, and that the generations that come after us, like being able to empower them to say, you have the ability, you already have that power now, you need to just use it, and let us help you by being a resource so that you can use it, and that you should feel that we want you to use it. So being able to do this across, a multi-ethnic racial lens is so empowering to me, because I know that I have the support of Latinas Represent and Higher Heights and all the other coalitions that are built for women, because they want this as well. And so it's the equal importance of value that all the coalition members see in one another. So I think that's a part of it, is knowing that I have a really strong support system in my colleagues in the coalition, and that they know that I'm going to give them as much as they give to us when we want to uplift each other.
Yeah, we just don't have like the luxury to check out because we're like, oh, well, this wasn't made for us. Like, if even more reason for us to dig in, get in there, and work on the systems change, right? So I guess I'll just say, what is one thing, and it can be positive or negative since we kind of already talked about the challenges, that you wish you knew, and we'll go down the line of, starting with April, just of what you wish you knew when you were starting this, like, mashing together of these people.
Wow, that I think going back to what we talked about with, time and like demands on time, we know just through doing all the training that we do through Advance for the classes that trying to find trainers, trying to find candidates, when you're the one and only, yeah, I am, working with Advance, that's my full-time job, but I also serve on council, which is, they say it's part-time. It's not part-time. So the demands on my time just for fulfilling those roles are incredible. And then on top of that, because I'm right now the one and only Native elected in Maine, that has voting power. We do have tribal representatives in the legislature, but they don't have voting power, which is unfortunate. I am often the one that is tapped for panels, for stories, for different initiatives, for task force, for whatnot, and I absolutely want to do all of the things just because I know the importance of sitting in these spaces and being able to share these stories and share these needs, but then it makes the work that we do to bring more voices into these spaces so that we're not the one and only, so that we are able to spread out that time is just so important. So it really becomes a challenge to say yes to all the things, and all of the things are so important as we're talking about building these coalitions. And so in Advance, when we look for trainers for our different candidate training classes, we can't just look for Native trainers because there aren't enough to be able to fulfill that. So we have to look at our other coalitions. We have to look, who else is an expertise in this field but has this same lens that we're looking through to try and increase representation so that we stop having the one and only. We have the first and, the next 27 that come after them. But time, I wish I knew the realistic time needed to do the jobs and do the jobs well, because I don't think that's something that we talk about often enough. It's like, I would love you to run for office. I think you're going to be great. You have wonderful ideas. I'm not going to tell you about all the other stuff that happens. And then you get into those spaces, especially if you're a woman of color who is the first and only. And there are also safety considerations that we don't talk about. There is, racism and bias that we don't talk about. There is the, hey, by the way, you're doing a full-time job, and then you're going to a 4-hour council meeting, and then you have to do all the research for the policy. So I think it's also being really upfront and honest with each other about what's required of these roles, not to scare people, but so that we can realistically set expectations for how we use our time. I have 4 children, and I have a husband and dogs, and they all are so deserving of my time as well. And so now I know. And so now as I'm training these other Native electeds who are coming after me.
Go ahead, Selena.
I think when I made the decision to run for office, I was 22 years old. I was in the middle of my first year teaching, and I'm about to be 27. And so, I've grown up a lot, right? In some way, I feel like I've grown up in the legislature, kind of in public, in front of everybody. Don't know that I'd recommend it for everyone. But I don't think I knew that the emotional toll that this position would have on you, and that's for a couple reasons. I remember the first hearing where, outside the building, people had signs to deport me. And I got, there were just racist remarks made to me. I had to get escorted from my office to the room and back. And it still traumatizes me a little bit. My students were so upset. They saw it, they saw pictures of it online, and they got so mad. And I told them just don't engage, but they did anyways. They were very upset, the emotional impact it had on my family too, for my mom and my dad to see people making fun of me because of my last name, or where I come from, or what I look like, whatever it is. There's one of the more conservative mail or newspaper groups, they have a photo of me that they share all the time. It's probably the worst photo I've ever seen. I don't know how they did it. I look very whitewashed and gray, almost. I look like I'm a zombie. And they share that photo even recently, like about some campaign thing. Recently, my opponent, this is a true story and a very weird story, but in my primary, my opponent robbed a bank. During my primary, my opponent robbed a bank. And in the story that they did that was all about me, they put something that kind of suggested, the way it was worded, suggested that I was the one that robbed the bank.
Wow.
Like it said, only opponent robs bank. And then it had a picture of me. And so all these little things, they add up. They add up over time, and it has an emotional toll on you. And I think when I first started, I didn't know how to cope with it, and I think it's something I'm still learning along the way. And I think for me, it's been crucial to have a strong support system, and I have a support system within our caucus and our group. Some of the people that you've met here, are part of that support system. I have that group of elected women that I can text and just vent to because they get it, they understand that they've been in that position, and even community members that I can text and that understand and that just get it and will, love me anyway, and give me that hug sometimes, because sometimes that's just what you need, even as a legislator. And so I think, that has been one of the things that I didn't expect. I was always a straight A student in school and top of my class. I graduated high school early, I graduated college early. I can do all the, I can check all the boxes, I can do all my part, but the emotional impact of the legislature and just this world is hard. It's a challenge.
Madalene.
So I'm always surprised by voters. Just because, we do work with the Barbara Lee Family Foundation. They are based out in Massachusetts, and their goal is to increase women in elected executive positions, meaning governor, mayor, county executives. And so they do polling with a Republican and a Democrat to find out how voters feel about women candidates regarding their views of, how they can see themselves as elected leaders in these roles. And so we partner with them. They also do a poll for the Latinas, the Black women, LGBTQ. And so the things that I learned from this poll, whether it's a voter saying that an Asian American woman with, who's 50 years old with no prior public service background, never held elected office, could run for governor and win, regardless of party, against a white male candidate at the opposing party, surprised me. Because we often see white men with no public service background doing this all the time. And yet, even me, who have spent the majority of my political career working in electing diverse people, was still shocked that that could happen. And I should have already believed that could happen. And it took a poll to tell me that it could happen. And so voters surprise me all the time. And they come from different backgrounds. It's a nationwide poll. At the same time, it also reinforced ideas of how voters think of our community as an Asian American woman. That poll, another poll more recently, also showed that in terms of how an Asian American woman should address sexism on the campaign trail, voters have a more positive view when you think about constituencies. If a white woman addressed it, it's okay. If an Asian woman addressed it, falls under the white woman, they don't think of us as a woman of color. But Latinas and Black women, negative. And so, one, it tells me that they don't think Asian American women are women of color. 2, they put us together with white women. 3, Asian American women should be uplifting Latinas and Black women when they see it happen, regardless of political party and affiliation. Because that sexism is every day. It happens on the trail, it happens in regular life. And if we aren't there, again, to make sure that we are calling it out because they let us call it out, because they think it's okay for us to call it out, but not okay for Latinas and Black women, we need to support whenever it happens. And so, again, voters always surprise me. And so, this work in learning more about voters and how they think and what the political environment also dictates to them or sways them helps me better understand and empower Asian American women to make those decisions when they go on the campaign trail. So voters, always a surprise.
And just, yeah, because there is power in numbers, and we are, as we've stated through this whole weekend, like, we are better together. And so, like, we do need to come together and support each other. And so just before we change over to Q&A, just one last question for you, April. I know before we were talking about just even some of the training that you had before running for office. And so, you know, those were, and then now you're doing training in multiracial and multi-ethnic groups. So if you can just kind of talk about that.
Sure. So I went through a political training program in 2018 after the 2016 election. I also am a teacher. I have switched careers, obviously. But watching the confirmation hearings of someone who was incredibly unqualified to be the Secretary of Education, I was yelling at C-SPAN like I was yelling at a Patriots game. I was like, no, foul, that's wrong. And so immediately I pull out my laptop and I'm like, all right, I need to figure out how to train to run for office because this cannot stand. I can't be Secretary of Education right out of the gate probably, but I can learn something, and whether it's running for school board or council, I'll figure it out. And so I was able to find a program and completed that training in 2018. But what I found very interesting in that training program, it was just me and another woman of color, and all the rest were not, is in all of the discussions that we had about fundraising, about messaging, about doing doors, you know, about building your ground game, there was never a consideration for what do you do when you encounter someone who is racist or someone who is not supportive of you even being in their neighborhood, let alone, you know, serving in public office. You know, how do you build your messaging with your values? So, you know, as an Indigenous person, we are storytellers. That's our history. That's our culture. And so the way in which we were taught to build stump speeches through this particular program was very counterintuitive to the way that I set you in, you know, this moment, because I want you to feel what I feel as I tell you about myself, as I tell you about my values, as I tell you, you know, why I want to, you know, serve for you in office. It all didn't feel like it quite matched. It was this one very specific lens. And when we asked questions, the other woman in the class with me was Somali. She had been in Maine for about 20 years, but she was poised to be the first Somali woman elected to school board in a neighboring town, and now is the first Somali mayor that has been elected. She's amazing. But we kept asking questions like, well, how would you address this? And the trainers had no idea. They were just like, you know, we're going to write that on the parking lot, and we'll come back to that. They didn't come back to it. And so, you know, in having that experience, I really had to kind of build my own campaign strategy, because everything that I had been taught didn't match what my experience was going to look like. And so as I heard of this group called Advanced Native Political Leadership, who was building a Native candidate training program, I was like, wait, tell me more about that. Like, what do you mean? And so now I'm the national program manager, because it absolutely aligned with everything that I felt and experienced, not only as someone, you know, going through political training, but then even as being an elected official. And then being in this space. And now we've had our second class, so we have 16 alumni, which is so exciting. But we have all these intersectional identities. So we have Black and Indigenous women, we have Black and Asian women, we have Pacific Islander women. And so we've been able to have these conversations about what their different communities are like, but with such a different lens. And so I just love the idea that if it doesn't exist for us, we build it. And we build it in an intersectional way, in a multiracial way, with coalitions, because there's not enough of us in these positions by design of the system to just have, you know, enough to go around. So we really have to build it and create it. So that has been just a gift. We are very young still, so we're also learning with every class that we have. What can we do better? What can we change? How do we make it more accessible? How do we make it, you know, more intersectional? But yeah, it's been an amazing journey so far.
Great. And Okay, so my final question is to Selena, and I knew you were very youthful, but then when you said you were 22 when you decided to run, and some of the things that April was speaking on, so I'm sure you had to create things as you were going along and kind of, I mean, of course you had your support systems and, you know, you're leaning on multi-ethnic and multiracial networks, but just, I know that you will have something to share to the people out here that may be thinking about running for office, and you know they may be about your same like age range, and I just would love for you to share that that part of your story.
Yeah, so when I made the decision to run for office, so I had volunteered on many campaigns, and I think in 2016, that was the year I graduated college, and I had gone to El Salvador. Well, I studied abroad in Costa Rica, and then I went to go visit my grandparents in El Salvador while I was there. And I remember just like watching like the rhetoric that Trump was using on the 2016 campaign trail, and I was actually at like a Father's Day dinner with my grandpa and all of my cousins and aunts and uncles, and like even they were just like talking about it, right? And just talking about the language that he was using to talk about immigrants, you know, immigrants like my father, right? And for even in Latin America, like it felt like it was personal, right? Like you could sense the anger and the frustration with an entire people. And like I knew that I wanted to go back to Vegas and I wanted to do something. So when I came back home, I volunteered on the campaign. I didn't work for the campaign. I had like another job working in a law office at the time, but like I just like volunteered. Like I was volunteering for that campaign like 30, 40 hours a week because I really cared. And so obviously, you know, that night was disappointing, and I didn't think that I was going to run for office. I feel like I did all the steps to eventually run for office, but I didn't think that I didn't have a plan to run for office. And quite honestly, running for office while getting a master's degree during your first year teaching is like really stressful. Yeah, and I had just bought a home too, so it was a lot. And like I did make that decision, and you know, I think I've had unique barriers or unique obstacles that I've had to overcome being a young person in these spaces. You know, from everything from, you know, older white male lobbyists saying that, you know, it's a shame that there's so many little kids now in the building, you know, and like talking about me, and now my colleague, Senator Doñate, who's like 8 months younger than me. And so, you know, there's like, I get that rhetoric a lot, or people were just dismissive of me at first, you know, or they would ignore me. I had colleagues my first session that thought I was an intern, or that refused to meet with me, and lobbyists that handled me the same way. And that's hard because here in Nevada, like our lobby corps, like lobbyists represent every interest. They get kind of a bad rep on a national scale, but lobbyists represent every interest from, you know, the things we care and love to the things we also hate. But you want to meet with them if you're carrying a bill that impacts their issue, and they were like, sometimes they were just outright dismissive. I had a lobbyist last session who called me very inappropriate names out in the main area of the building, thinking that it wouldn't get back to me. And another lobbyist brought it to me, and she's like, they would never say that about a white male legislator. Why is it okay they say it about you? And it was another lobbyist of color who had told me. It's frustrating and it's hard, and it happens, but at the same time, I embrace my youthfulness. You know, I think I have a long time to fulfill my political goals here in the state of Nevada. I have the time to accomplish it. I'm fortunate that, like, you know, I have great role models and, you know, mentors. Assemblywoman Wynn, who, even though she completed her first session at the same time as me, you know, I didn't know how to be a professional in this space because, you know, my mom was a teacher too. My dad works in a casino. Like, none of my nobody in my household has a suit, just me, you know. So it was like one of those things, like I had to learn how to like fit into this world, and I didn't know how. I didn't know how to negotiate things. Like that wasn't what we as educators, you're not negotiating grades. If you are, it's not a good teacher. So I had to figure out like how to fit. I don't have rich friends to like ask for money from. Like most of my friends are about my age and also teachers, or my mom's friends, I guess, that are also teachers. So like it wasn't like I had like this like big like financial backing either. So I think learning to navigate this space has been a challenge, but nonetheless, I think that I can focus on issues that my colleagues maybe don't understand. I'm way like more comfortable using social media. I have a TikTok. And like like yesterday, there was a group of fellows at an event I was at, and they were super excited to meet me because they've been following me on TikTok for so long. They were very excited, and so I think I can touch and work with groups that maybe my colleagues might not understand. For me, that's a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, your 16, 17-year-old constituents, they're going to be 18 maybe for like the next election, and you're getting far and ahead of, many others. So I think that your lived experience is definitely valuable in the whole thing. So it is time for Q&A. And so,
Hi there. Hi there. Thank you so much for this panel. Amaranth Lee, City Councilwoman San Mateo. I wanted to ask for some sort of tactical strategies that you've used in public spaces to counter either mansplaining or conversely uplift voices that you felt like were not represented. I think those are like those kind of communication strategies in real time are skills that we really want to exercise fully, muscles that need to be well used. And so I'm really curious to hear if you have any go-tos and what they are.
Sacrificial lamb, huh? No. I think it's a great question. So currently on council in Maine, we have 9 members. The mayor is a voting member. And this last election, were able to get a little bit more of a progressive council. And so it feels like we're able to move some things forward. We do have a couple of council members who are the expert in every occupation. I don't understand how that's possible. How someone who is not a certified teacher knows more than someone who is a certified teacher, but that's fine. Where it is truly every issue. It's mansplaining, it's just going off on it. It's like, is your 5 minutes up yet? Because I've had it. And so I think one of the things that myself and one of my fellow counselors, Victoria Pelletier, who is incredible, have done is really, when he's done speaking, we actually address it pretty directly. So we have to direct our comments to the mayor. We can't engage in debate amongst each other. It would be really fun if we could. But it's really, correcting some of what has been said. And so in this last meeting we had, we were talking about zoning or something like that. And it was just this long, I don't know, an epic poem that he was giving about zoning. And the way that he was focusing his comments, it was really an attack on us for asking questions about zoning, during council deliberation. So we were asking about, things that city staff had done, does this make sense? Should we try something else? Should we have an amendment? And it was this, I trust our city staff to do their job and know what they're doing. And, we should really just allow them to do their work, and, we should rubber stamp what they're doing. But it's been this narrative that has happened over and over and over again. And it's very targeted to us who would dare ask a question or say, maybe this isn't the right thing to do. And so we really finally had enough and just said to the mayor, the fact that it is expected that we just accept what's being presented to us and move it through why do you need to have a council? Why would you need to have a governing body? We were elected to ask questions because of our different identities, because of our different experiences. We might see something else that, for me, I know I'm always thinking about who's not in the room, who's not at the table, who didn't have a voice in this discussion. And there was another policy about emergency shelter that they worked on for like a year and a half that was driven by neighborhood associations and not by shelter providers. And we finally had enough votes to vote it down. But it was, again, bringing it back to who's not in the room and who's not part of this conversation. And I am their voice in this discussion, in this deliberation, to ask these questions. So to have a colleague really almost attack me for being someone who deliberates and really wants to make a good decision is offensive. And now that we've said it a few times, it's starting to sink in. He's not running for re-election. But yeah, I think being super direct, I try to not engage if it's, especially on social media, it's never a win if people are coming after you. I just fine, if that's what you want to do, great, I'm still going to do my job. I'm still going to serve that, so a little bit of pivoting, but I like to be direct because it makes them uncomfortable.
I definitely use that response many times as well. I think that the other one is just sometimes mansplaining allows for me to just listen, and I don't have to always respond, right? I let them talk. Sometimes I get more information out of it than I really, maybe they tell me something that they probably shouldn't be telling me. And it helps me just kind of connect the dots of what else is going on behind the scenes. So, I oftentimes, if it's a private one-on-one meeting and, it's myself and maybe a lobbyist in my office, I let them talk, I let them do their part. And if I try to interject and they interrupt me. And then there's other times, though, where it crosses a line. So I remember one particular bill where it's actually, I'll tell you the lobbies later. Now I could see Brittany's all excited. So these three male lobbyists that were pretty, probably into their 50s, and this is my first session. I come in to I invited them into my office. They were frustrated with me about a piece of legislation. I completely disagree with them to this day, but whatever. They came into my office. They're meeting with me. I invite them to sit down, and I sat down. They stood over me during this meeting, berating me about the legislation, talking to me like I was a little kid. At some point, I looked at the gentleman and I said, Mr. So-and-so, you are not my father. I'm not your child. If you want to have a meeting and talk about this issue, we can have that discussion. But if that's not the case, you can get out of my office. And so... there is a line. To this day, that gentleman's actually not allowed to meet with me. Because we have say over our schedule, and I think he crossed out multiple lines, not just with me, but with other legislators. And if somebody's going to, stomp all over you, talk to you disrespectfully.
And struggling to also make our space. And so I'd like to say is it seems like some of the ethnic groups that have come before us like to just treat the rest of us like they were treated. And that if we can do better at reaching back and helping other communities that are smaller, the Asian community has the Hmong community. There's tons of communities that need our assistance to reach back. And just because you've gotten somewhere doesn't mean that you treat others the same way.
I think one of my questions I have is centered around this concept, or at least there's a term for it now, of racial gatekeeping or ethnic gatekeeping. And I think there's often this, not just within generations within the API community, of folks saying, well, I came here, I immigrated here, my struggles are not your struggles, to the younger generation assimilating. But I do see that there is a difference between immigration struggle, assimilation struggle. It's something I discuss with my friends and parents who immigrated. But I also see this kind of duality that folks who've grown up mixed race or grown up here are often, placed in these boxes, or as Assemblywoman Miller said in her opening remarks, you have these labels thrown at you of, oh, you're not really Hispanic, you don't speak Spanish. You're not really Indian, you don't speak your language. And so I wanted to know if that's impacted or if that's ever touched some, you in some spaces, and how you are working to overcome that. What are ways we collectively as women can do that in our individual lives and together in these spaces, really to not, make sure we're not engaging in racial gatekeeping, and make sure we're not, infighting or dividing within our own communities, and then again in our political spaces, to really build that unity and really not, shame folks for not knowing their language or.
Selena, would you like to take that?
Yeah, so that's obviously something that hits close to home, as a mixed woman. I think that's something that I've dealt with my whole life. Growing up, we spoke English in the home because my dad didn't want us to grow up with an accent. Although I do speak Spanish now, it's not as good as my English. My siblings don't speak any Spanish. And so, I'm very, aware of that. Like I said yesterday, I talked a little bit about my mom. I mean, my mom grew up on the island of Hawaii, and her dad was Portuguese Hawaiian, but she grew up in and out of foster care with her mom, who was Jewish American, and, she was in and out of homelessness, and so when she left, I mean, she doesn't